Hey folks, I've got a couple of plugins here which you may have seen doing the rounds at the moment, YouTube, Instagram. People are talking about them. This is the Safari Pedals plugins. Now, for me, these two plugins that I'm going to show you are fantastic for creating a kind of lo-fi sort of sound and adding an extra element to your tracks. Now, this is a kind of lo-fi, laid-back kind of jazz track, which I've got a couple of these plugins on, and it's completely transforming them. Now, the first one is the Reverb pedal plugin. That is the Flamingo Verb. And the second one is Time Machine. Time Machine is really interesting. I've got that on the master bus. I want to play you a before and an after, and then we're going to go into a little more depth and see exactly what these plugins are doing. Now, the first thing I want to talk about here really is the reverb. So for this reason, I'm just going to turn the Time Machine plugin off because we can get a better sense for what's actually going on before we kind of affect the main master output. So this reverb is interesting because we've got a few controls here that we're kind of familiar with. We've got pre-delay, high pass, low pass, but the really interesting one here I find is the time, because as the manual tells us, the time doesn't just affect the time. The time actually affects the type of reverb that it is. It changes whether it's a plate, whether it's a hall, and what kind of reverb is actually being created there. So if we just solo this reverb bus just for a moment, we can hear our reverb. If we take it all the way down, we're getting a far more intimate sound. Around there, it's kind of changing. It's not actually just changing the size, the length of the reverb, it's changing the actual kind of way that it's doing it, I guess, the reverb algorithm and what kind of space it's actually emulating. So it's something to bear in mind that even though I had this up at like 2.5 seconds, it is a very long reverb, but it's actually just engaging that other part of the reverb, engaging that kind of longer, broader space. That broadness can also be governed by the width, which I find really effective. So if I just press play again, this is just the reverb. You can hear that getting thrown out to the sides. Kind of narrow. All the way out. Let's just take a listen to the guitar and the keys, which is what I've got it on, and the reverb, and then we'll mute the reverb, take it out, to bring it back in again. That's with the reverb. Just kind of dies a little bit, and I find that this reverb is really great for just adding a sense of space, which adds to the whole lo-fi aesthetic. It just creates this kind of cushion, this sort of blanket around the sound, so that nothing really ends. It just creates this sense of space around it, so the sense that it's happening in a real environment. And it's not like any other reverb. You can't just say that this sounds like a plate, this sounds like a room, because when you're dialing in that time constant, it's changing, and it's making it so that the numbers that are on there, like 2594 milliseconds, 2.5 seconds, you almost kind of have to just say, all right, that says that, but I'm actually going to ignore it because it's changing the algorithm, and it's just changing the size of the overall, the kind of aesthetic of it. So this Time Machine plugin is really interesting, and for me, it's best used in small doses, but I've got it on the main output and I'm not using any kind of buses. I'm just using the blend control down here. Now, on Flamingo Verb, I actually had that on a bus, so I've just got the blend up to 100%. Let's just take the solo and the mute off and just take a listen to this as I bring it from 0 and then just blend it in. You're going to notice two things. First of all, the bottom end kind of disappears as it comes up to the extreme settings. That's fine. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And then the overall just kind of crunch just changes. So I've got this on 50s at the moment, so this is a very affected lo-fi kind of sound, which is maybe what you're looking for, that lo-fi kind of aesthetic in just one plugin. You can just put on the master output and you're going to get that lo-fi kind of sound. So let's bring this blend up. So just taking hold of it. Just making it a little more crunchy, a little more compressed, and that's governed by the input and output. Now, I've got auto gain on, and that means that as I turn the input up, the output is going to come down. If you don't have that auto gain engaged, then that won't happen. I like to have that engaged because it just makes sure that everything's kind of equal loudness. Let's just bring up that input, and you're really going to get a sense of this crunch and then the compression knob as well. really crunchy. And then the trick here is bring the blend down. So you're creating kind of a parallel lo-fi, almost parallel compression kind of thing. Let's take it off and then bring it back in again. It just kind of transports you a little bit and brings you into a different decade, one that would sound a little less bass heavy, a little less top heavy, and just brings that lo-fi aesthetic. But we've also got a few more decades that we can kind of go through. Let's bring the blend all the way up just so we can hear them. Start off in 50s, go through 60s, 70s, 80s. So I think the 80s is kind of the cleanest, and when you come up to 70s and 80s, you get that bottom end that kind of comes back in. 60s to me sounds far crunchier than 50s. Let's just go 50s to 60s. Mid-range focused. Really growly. Super growly. So if I bring that blend down when it's on 60s, when you take the plugin off, it's like everything just gets let go. Everything just goes crazy and kind of is less tamed. But bringing this in on the master output, this Time Machine, and bringing this blend down, you get the best of both worlds. You get that overall grind that you get from this Time Machine plugin, and you get the original dry signal in there as well. You can have this at 50-50, have this higher, have it lower, wherever kind of works for you. So I find these two plugins to be really useful in a lo-fi kind of genre and creating a real aesthetic around a sound. The reverb is just like a real pillowy kind of thing. It just adds a sense of space, and as you bring that time control up, it's important for me anyway not to really look at the numbers, but just to listen and just kind of hear exactly what it's doing. It's not just the time control, it's changing the reverb algorithm as well. And Time Machine, it speaks for itself. It's adding that overall grit, that overall kind of distortion that you would associate with the different genres you've got there to play with. And bringing that blend control down means that you're getting the best of both worlds. You can get that grit, you can get the crunch, the distortion, and still have some of the original dry signal in there as well. I hope it's been useful for you. Give them a try now. You can get a free trial on the website, all that kind of stuff. I'll see you again soon. Take care.